Welcome back, everybody, to the Even Your Dynasty show.
We just got breaking news in.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Even Your Dynasty show. We have a treat for you today, and we're going to do kind of a mid-season, minor league report for the Giants system. And we've got Roger Munter here to join us. So welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I was just watching the intro. You guys have had some really cool guests on this show. Charlie Ciccone, what a fun guy to interview.
Yeah, we've been very blessed early on. We've got a lot of other great young players that we're hoping to get on. Dan and Ricky were in San Jose just a couple weekends ago talking, for a few minutes with a handful of different players. And, apparently a bunch of those guys know us and they love watching it. So, we really like to focus on getting those kind of similar to you, getting some of those young guys out there that don't, we've always felt Major League Baseball doesn't necessarily market its future that great. So just trying to give them a opportunity to let them get themselves out there.
That's super cool. And the players, I feel, not 100%, but most of them really like that. They really appreciate kind of people being interested in them and their stories, and they like talking. I always have to work with the organization. They're very sensitive about going straight to players. So I kind of have to color within the boundaries, which sometimes limits who I get to talk to, or at least the timing of when I get to talk to people. But yeah, I mean, players love having people notice what they're doing, and I think that's just such a cool thing.
Yeah, and we love the work you put out there. Can you tell us Giants fans? I think most Giants fans probably know who you are, especially on X nowadays. But can you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of what inspired you to cover the Giants?
Yeah, well, it's. I hope most. I'm not sure if most Giants fans know who I am. Maybe this time would be doing a little bit better than it does. But I know I have a niche following out there, which is really fun. So I've had a Substack site called Their Giants for the last 5 years. I get media credentials at all the affiliates. So I'm in Richmond a lot because I'm based on the East Coast. I always fly out to Arizona and see the minor league and the complex. I'll get out to Eugene and San Jose later in the summer when the humidity is unbearable here. I like going out to Oregon. So I get to all the teams, talk to as many players as I can, get video of as many players as I can. And it's a fun research. It's fun for me. I love doing it. And of course, my subscribers allow me to get out and do as much as I can. And I feel good that, when a trade like Rafael Devers trade happens, it's like, okay, everyone knows Kyle Harrison. A lot of people know who James Tibbs is. My readers know who Jose Bayo is because I've been talking about Jose Bayo for a couple of years now, and he's someone who I know had come up in trade talks before because I've been told this. If you read my site, you're going to know who all these guys are before they get to San Francisco, before they get the attention of the big guys, and that's, I think, the service that I provide.
Yeah. Absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit about the There Are Giants podcast? Because I know you do writing as well, but can you tell us a little bit about your podcast too?
Yeah, so I mean, the writing is just sort of a comprehensive review of everything that happens or too comprehensive, I think, sometimes, which is 5 days a week, and during the winter I'll put out a top 50 and a lot of other stuff. And the podcast, I try to get up weekly. I guess have two podcasts now because I'm doing this side gig with Kerry Crowley, where we do the K-Raj, which I think he'll put on KNBR and I put on my site. But then I have the Their Giants podcast, which is focused on prospect development. And it's about half interviews with players that I get again at the affiliates, and half interviews with prospect writers, or just right now, actually, I have 2 interviews scheduled later this afternoon. I've been talking with the radio guys for all the teams. So I've been talking to Eugene last week. I'm going to talk with Joe Rizzo later, and Zach Beruti, and kind of get a temperature of what's going on with the teams. I'll talk with Baseball America guys, Jim Callis, all the sort of like big people in prospect development, and I try and get some modern data people on now and again. I try and mix it up. Saris has been on. I try and throw as wide a net as I can on sort of thinking about player development, because really what I'm trying to do is get my hands around what are people in the industry thinking? How are they thinking about player development? What are they looking for? And all these things, which is a big mystery and kind of a topic of great fascination to me.
Yeah, definitely. So everybody will definitely put Rogers, all his links for his podcast, his Substack, all that stuff. We'll put it in the description on this video so you guys can easily find him. So
very cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll go back and answer your first question. I mean, I am a Californian. My dad went to the first San Francisco Giants game there ever was. We were, born in the wool Giants fans all my life. And when I was, like preteen or teenager, the Giants had a minor league team in Fresno, and Fresno B was the paper in our house. And there was a couple years there in the 70s where the Giants were really terrible. And they had these Fresno teams that were really, really great. I remember Jack Clark was on a team there, 74, that just dominated Cal League. So you'd read this really depressing story about the San Francisco Giants game the day before. And below it was this tiny little story about, the Fresno Giants killing somebody. And I think that always sort of created this interest in me at sort of looking towards the future.
Yeah, definitely. And there were also, in kind of recent memory, I mean, after they had their run with Barry, they had a little stretch where they went down, and then a lot of hope with, Sabian and them nailing a couple drafts in a row.
Yeah.
A lot of great prospects. And then, kind of after the peak, it went back to the valley a little bit, and, you kind of same thing. You start turning to the future a little bit, and hopefully we're kind of back on that upswing. It looks like. So,
yeah.
So what are your opinions right now of the Giants system overall in 2025, whether it's, comparing it to other systems around the game? I know they don't get the most friendly rankings when you look at national writers or anything like that, but what are your kind of personal opinions on the system?
Well, I think the thing that I like to focus on is last year's team. Prospect rankings, which are very valuable. I love them. I've read them all my life. But they're also artificial in a way, because in terms of putting a baseball team together, it doesn't matter whether somebody is a prospect or not. But for the purpose of writing about this, people do have to draw a line. So, they use the rookie eligibility as a line to draw. Last year, the Giants had something like 13 or 14 people leave prospect status. And some of them are still in the minors. Grant McRae is no longer a prospect, or at least not by MLB's rookie eligibility. Marco Luciano, Kyle Harrison, guys like these all graduated. And I think that very reasonably created sort of a dip in talent from a prospect perspective. On the other hand, from a young talent perspective, having guys like Hayden Birdsong and Landon Roop and Elliot Ramos and Casey Schmitz having good games. Randy Rodriguez, who is somebody who I was a huge fan of for so many years. Having all that young talent on the major league club is obviously more important, and the two are tied to each other. The system is down. I don't think there's any, particularly after the Devers trade, I don't think there's any denying that the level of talent, particularly the upper minors, is a little bit low right now. But it's low for a good reason, which is that they've done a really good job of getting talent onto the major league squad, and a major league squad that is good. It's competing for a playoff spot. That's pretty exciting to me when I watch those. I'll do this with my wife. I'll watch, the game on Sunday. And we're like, hey, he's been on my podcast. He's been on my podcast. He's been on my podcast. I know that guy. And that's really fun. It's fun for me. I don't know. Other people might not get as big a kick out of it, but I love seeing a team full of young people who I watched from, rookie ball on up.
Yeah. We definitely have that feeling with like Casey Schmidt, who was nice enough to chat with us last offseason. So him having success, it's like these guys joke in the group chat that it's like a proud papa moment for me every time he has a good game. So I definitely understand that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and Casey's a guy, I remember talking to him first in San Jose when he really – it was interesting. When I watched him, I immediately, I ranked him pretty highly on my thing because it was clear all the tools he had, and he was hitting the ball really hard, but his numbers didn't look great, which I know frustrated him a little bit. But he was really good about talking kind of through that process. And then I caught up to him the next year in Richmond when he'd had a tremendous year. And I remember he said, it was actually good for him to go through that because he had to sort of, do that failure management thing that all these players have to learn along the way. It was really helpful to him. He's had to do more of that since, but it's a good lesson to learn at the lower levels that not everything's going to go great all the time for you.
Yeah.
Now, Roger, going back on Cody's last question, why do you feel it is that the Giants system tends to get overlooked a lot when you look at guys like, say, Hayden Birdsong, who seems like nobody really caught on to until way later on, until he was almost at the big league level. And, guys like Landon Roop as well, who is, not to my knowledge, ever a top 100 prospect.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, those are tricky waters to get into. And I try to avoid them sometimes because, look, every fan in the world, I do this too. You watch the national broadcast and you're like, these guys hate my team. And, I know the guys at BA, every time they put out any ranking, they hear from all these people who tell them they hate their team. These guys don't hate your team. They just don't. Now, are there historical reasons for this? I think there are some things because perceptions do play into it. The Dodgers, look, everybody the Dodgers trade for suddenly is throwing 100 miles an hour with crazy spin, and all the hitters they get have great launch angle. And we have seen the Dodgers acquire players, their prospect status balloon, get traded, and suddenly they're no good anymore. We have seen this happen over and over again. There is something to everybody kind of having underlying perception that the Dodgers make players better. And so there is some overrating. Now, the Dodgers, the other thing they do is if you ever go to Dodgers camp in March, I know somebody goes there all the time who calls it the body shop because, honest to God, everybody's huge, everybody is strong, everybody is fast, and that matters, particularly in prospect circles. The Giants have for a long time tended to scout older players, which isn't great on teams' models. They tend to get college guys who are sort of capable hitters, but they end up, this was happening in the 80 years, they end up with a lot of corner bats, And I was talking to a scout in March when I went out to spring training. I was talking to a scout. I had missed the spring breakout game because my wife and I were on vacation. And this guy was saying, this was a scout for another team who covers the Giant system. And he said, it was really good for me that the first day I looked at them this year was the spring breakout, because I go watch the spring breakout game and I look at Texas aside, and everybody out there is twitchy and everybody out there is really powerful. And every guy coming out of their bullpen is throwing 100. And then I look at the Giants and, not naming any names, but that's not the athlete that they have on the field. They have some, guys with skills you like, and you want these guys in your system, but it's not necessarily the guy I want in my top 10. And that I do think has been just an organizational preference, I think, over the years, that they maybe they like players rather than toolsy guys or whatever it is. They have a tendency to get players who don't necessarily pop in that kind of toolsy, twitchy way that scouts and prospect writers really like to see. And Birdsong, unbelievable development story, but he happened so fast. There were guys on him. I was getting stuff from scouts. I'll tell you this, it's like, oh my goodness. But even when he showed up, and I knew the Giants really liked him, I'd heard that first year when he was so successful and he got up to Richmond, it was really fastball curve. The change was a nothing pitch. The slider was inconsistent. He came back to Richmond the next year, and he'd invented an entirely new changeup, and his slider was night and day different. And it's like his aptitude at improving himself in a really short period of time was incredible, which is a great development story, and I think does really, look good for the Giants. And the last thing I'll say, and I really hate going down this road because it's probably a bad road to go down, but if you go back to the days of Moneyball, Billy Beane was a guy who knew how to work the media, and not just in that book. In general, he knew how to talk to people who were writers about the stuff he was doing and how smart he was, and that pervaded how people wrote about A's trades and A's player development. Brian Sabian and Dick Tidrow and that group always believed that there was no competitive advantage to them in talking about themselves to the media. They were very closed-mouthed. They were very close to the vest. They, I think, projected an image of being a little more old school than they actually were. They did some pretty interesting technological things back in the day, but they didn't like talking about it. And I do think there has always been an element of people looking at the Giants as a sort of Luddite organization that has always been slightly out of step with the way they actually do things. And I don't want to push that narrative too hard because I think people overdo it, but I think it is out there a little bit that they're not the organization that comes to anybody's mind when you say, who's doing something well. They don't come up in those conversations. And maybe it's because they're not doing things well, and maybe it's because they don't like talking about the things that they do well.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I like that about Sabian. Okay, so that actually, you know what, I'm gonna jump a couple questions down from what I have here, but because I want to follow up on something that you kind of mentioned, with the development and everything. Obviously, it's only been a half a season since Posey's been in charge, and Randy Wynn's, I know he's still working with Kyle Haynes, but kind of overseeing all that. Have you seen any, obvious differences in the development style this year?
There are some that have caught my eye. The big and obvious one is starting pitching. They're just pitching a lot further into games. Carson Wisenhunt threw 7 innings in 4 straight starts last month, and it was the first time anybody had done that in Sacramento since, I believe, Andrew Suarez. I'm sure it was the first time anybody's done that anywhere in the Giants organization for a while. They were putting people on really severe pitch counts the last few years, and there were times where you could see the problems that caused when they got Kyle Harrison to the majors and he's suddenly throwing 100 pitches and he hadn't thrown more than 70 in the minors. The same thing happened to Mason Black in his debut. The crucial inning they were trying to get him through, and he was past his max innings or max pitches. They're really pushing guys, and they're pushing guys because they want them to learn how to pitch through trouble. I know. In fact, when I was at spring training, you could see this because in spring, when you're at minor league games in spring, very, very, very commonly, a guy will get into a long inning, they'll get a bunch of base runners, and you'll hear somebody from the dugout shout, "Roll it," which means that's it. We're not playing 3 outs this inning. This guy's hit his pitch limit. Let's go to the next inning. And there are a couple of clubs actually are notorious for doing that right when you're about to score. But very noticeably this year, the Giants weren't doing that. They were letting their guys work through jams as much as they could, unless, it was an egregious pitch limit or something. But they were letting guys do that. And the same thing is true I went to a doubleheader in Richmond this year and the minors doubleheaders are 7 innings, right? But still, they almost got through this entire doubleheader with 2 pitchers. Joe Whitman threw a 7-inning complete game the first one, and Seth Lonsway threw 6 2/3 in the second one. And that's remarkable. You just would never, ever have seen that the last few years. And I think the other one, and this really frustrates a lot of my readers I know from my mailbag questions, is they're being much more deliberate about moving people. They want people to spend time at a level and learn how to play the game. And it's not just, is it a flashy slash line for a couple weeks, you're up, which I think there were some guys who really had, some harm inflicted on them from the speed of Louis Matos suffered through a really, really hard year in high A with Eugene. He had He had some lingering injuries, and he just never got on a roll. And he hit like 210 that year. And it's like, oh, I don't know. Literally a month and a half later, he was in the majors. I mean, starting the next year, he comes to Richmond. He's up in Sacramento after a month, and then he's in San Francisco. Patrick Bailey, same thing. He had 2 tough years in Eugene. He played 14 games in Richmond, 14 games in Sacramento, and he's in the majors. I don't know that they were helping some of these guys really develop with the speed and rapidity of kind of moving them around. Marco Luciano, Grant McCrae, some of these guys got moved fast. And I think it would have benefited them to really learn level by level a little more. And I think that's what, they moved up Eldridge. But I don't think you're going to see a ton of promotions. Maybe when the draft comes along and they get more talent in, you'll start to see some movement. I don't know that you're going to see a ton of promotions this year. And Randy Wynn, he came up in a Tampa Bay Rays organization that was famous for moving guys one level 1 year. With very, very few exceptions, they kept people in a level for a full season because they wanted them to learn at that level. Every level you go up, the game gets faster, balls get hit harder, and people throw harder. And those are 3 kind of key elements of playing the game. And adjusting to that over a 6-month period comes with its own values. And I think that's what kind of Randy Wynn and Buster Posey see. So I think, we'll see. We'll see if Bo Davidson and Dakota Jordan get moved up. I have a feeling they're going to spend a lot of this year at a level trying to learn that level.
Interesting. So you kind of feel like they're going to maybe not all, completely one level per year, but you think it's going to definitely be a lot more deliberate.
I think so. I mean, we're all kind of learning, right? You can only guess. Once they've been here for a while, you can start to say they have trends. But right now, we're all guessing. That's certainly what they're saying, and they're not doing anything to make me think that they're not telling us the truth. So I suspect most of these players, you are going to see more deliberate movement. Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, on that topic, do you think that there's any chance the Giants change their approach to drafting if they're going to be moving guys slower, in the sense of maybe steering away from the older college prospects and leaning towards more, high upside high school guys?
I think that is a really fascinating question, and one that I am going to be watching carefully. I'll say this. Last year at the press conferences, there was Buster Posey at a press conference, and then there was a press conference when Zach Manasian was made GM. And I really perked my ears up that both of them said something almost identical, which is that they really wanted to bring in athletes who could help the club win in a lot of different ways, which is not something that there are a ton of in the Giants organization, to be quite honest. Speed has not been a big thing in the Giants organization for a while, and athleticism. It's noticeable when you get a great athlete. I heard that immediately, and I thought, I'm going to be really interested to see what kind of players they target going forward. And I immediately had a mental check mark in my head when I heard that. I said, I wonder how long Tibbs is going to be part of this organization, because James Tibbs, he can hit. I mean, nobody ever said anything about that he can't hit. He has great rhythm in the box. He has great feel. He doesn't swing at balls. He hits strikes hard. He's very likely to be a perfectly capable major league corner bat. But a real athlete with a well-rounded game that can help you win in a lot of different ways, that's not really James Tibbs. I mean, I think, a Tibbs outcome is more likely to be kind of a Jock Peterson sort of player. You can see that from him. But if you want guys who can run, who can field, who can, throw, that's something they need more of in this organization. Dakota Jordan is a great pick from that standpoint. And Bo Davidson is just an amazing scouting find. He's not quite as fast as Jordan, but I will be watching to see, are we going to get more athleticism into the organization, a few less of these kind of first base, third base, left field, corner bats that they've been drafting. And yeah, I'm with you. I'd love to see more high school players, because that tends to – AJ Preller, I I looked at this in the winter, and I'll fumble this a little bit, but I believe it's AJ Preller has never drafted a college guy, or maybe it's since Kyle Quantrill. It goes back to like 2017. In the first round, he has not drafted a college guy in the first round, and he's only drafted like 2 college guys in the top 3 rounds over his last like 7 or 8 years. And then he moves those kids fast, which, as you know, Kylie McDaniel is really good on this. Every team has a player evaluation model, and every model, you know, has its own secret sauce. But age relative to level is a really important thing for almost every team's models. So when you're shoving 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds up to AA, that's going to play really well in other teams' models, and it works really well when you're using those guys for trades. It also, as we've seen with like Jackson Merrill, can work pretty good when you keep them too. But I think it will be interesting to see if this year is going to be a great test case, because there's this huge group of high school shortstops who are first round picks this year. And I am definitely be waiting to see if the Giants target one of those, because if you want high end upside and athleticism, draft a high school shortstop. That's where those guys come from.
For sure. I know myself, Dan, the other person that's on our show, usually Ricky, and a lot of Giants fans have felt for years in Oracle Park that, you know, you look at the park and you think, oh, they must have a bunch of speed demons on this team. And it's been the complete opposite for 25 years. So I know we would all love to see them build a team that's, you know, offensively maybe very similar to the 2023 Diamondbacks that just steal a bajillion bags, hit line drives gap to gap, and you know, take advantage of dimensions.
You've got to develop those guys, right? Because you're getting people as free agents, they're on the downhill as far as speed goes. You know, the Diamondbacks had a lot of really fast, and you know, not all of them have hit. Alec Thomas hasn't really hit. McCarthy hasn't really hit, but those guys can cover ground in the outfield, and that's fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So just kind of as a broad view on the system, what do you view as kind of their organizational strength right now? Maybe that's positionally, like, and the second half of that would be, you know, which area do you think they need to address the most?
I mean, the organizational strength is very clearly, to my mind, pitching. Well, Bryce Eldridge and pitching. I mean, Bryce Eldridge is a top 20 guy in baseball. He's got just huge power that is going to kind of paper over whatever the weaknesses of his game are. He hit a ball 115 miles an hour as a 20-year-old, and 20-year-olds, Eric Longenhagen put something up about kind of average max exit velocity by age. And I think the average max exit velocity for 20-year-olds is like 104 miles an hour. And, you know, Bryce Eldridge out here be hitting 114, 115. So there's him. You'll set him aside. Other than that, it's pitching. And it's really, I mean, you've got this big group of guys of arms in Sacramento. And as we say, some of these guys are prospects, some aren't. But they're going to need them. I mean, they just shipped off 2 pretty good pieces to Boston. Landon Roop is already at what his innings total was for last year. Hayden Birdsong is going to get there. So they're going to need some of these guys, and I think we're going to see Carson Wisenhunt. We may see Carson Seymour, Trevor McDonald, Mason Black. That group is a pretty good depth group to have below AAA, and then it kind of falls off a couple levels. But the lower levels have a lot of interesting arms. San Jose actually has given up the least runs in the Cal League this year. Jacob Bresnahan, who they got from Cleveland last year in the Alex Cobb trade, as a 19-year-old lefty, he looked really good in spring when I saw him, and then he got knocked around. But his last month has been outstanding. They have a kid they signed in the international out of the Dominican in 2021, Jeremy Maldonado, who, you know, throws 100 with a pretty wicked slider. Greg Ferrone, who was one of the draft choices last year, a big lefty who throws well. That's an interesting club for arms. And then their complex level has had some real breakthroughs this year, which I think is one reason why they were okay moving Bayo, who is a really good arm, because there's so many other arms on that complex level. Argenis Kayama, who's a Venezuelan that they signed internationally last year, pretty new to pitching. He was an outfielder, and he converted because he wasn't getting any action in outfield. Most people thought he was the best pitching prospect in the DSL last year, and it seems like a growing consensus that he's the best pitching prospect in the Arizona Complex League this year. He's a really interesting kid, still pretty young, still 18. Very, very repeatable delivery. Sometimes will reach 96, 97, although he'll sit lower than that. Really good competitor. They have this kid, Kainer Martinez, who I saw last year, and he threw strikes. He threw a slider for strikes. It was fine. But this year he's throwing 98. I'm like, oh my God, what happened to this kid? They have a lefty down there named Louis De La Torre who's suddenly throwing 98. There's some arms down there. And I don't know if they're going to make any more trades because I've heard that they've taken on all the money they can take on at this point. But if they do, I would really look at the arms on that complex level team as potential trade chips. That's a pretty interesting group of arm talent up and down. Where the needs is on the position player side. They're not after Eldridge a lot of impact hitters necessarily. It's certainly been encouraging what Dakota Jordan's done this year. It's been encouraging what Bo Davidson's done this year, but it falls off pretty quick on the hitter side at most positions, particularly on the infield. There again, you look way, way low, like Johnny Level again at the Complex League. I think they've got something there. And they're very excited about Joshua Gonzalez, of course, in the DSL. But, above that, full season ball, the bats are definitely the place where they need to supplement. Now, the San Jose team has some pretty interesting bats, and they've got a lot of guys hitting. But you have to see. When you see college guys in low A, it's a pretty low level of pitching. There's not a lot of velocity. And some of those guys have big strikeout numbers, so it's a big red flag. So we'll see how that translates above. But to me, that's what I'd like to supplement. Is definitely on the position player and impact bats in particular.
For sure. Yeah, I know on our end we really enjoy a lot of the offensive talent that they acquired in the last draft and as well as what they're doing down in San Jose. I know. Yeah. I agree with you on the whole college bat in San Jose, and I've always been all for like extra development time, especially in the upper levels and things like that. But it's hard when you see, someone like Jacob Christian, who, was I think 3-year college player. Obviously he was Point Loma and then he went over to University of San Diego, and he's got, 55 RBIs and just kind of tearing the cover off the ball. And we're like, okay, can we see him in high A? Cause it might be better suited for his development long-term if he gets a little more.
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, you look at a guy like Christian, who's having a tremendous year. He leads that league in RBIs. He's hitting a lot of home runs. But he's a 22-year-old, and he's got like a 27% strikeout rate. So then you're like, okay, what's that going to look like when he gets up a level or two? Because we've seen that before, right? With Von Brown, just completely demolished that level. Gary Brown demolished that level. We know that some guys coming out of college who are more physically mature than a lot of their competition, who aren't seeing the best arms in the world, can put up big numbers in that league. Which didn't say that these guys won't be successful, but we have to see it kind of again. You have to see it again and again because guys come up to Richmond where I see a lot of games and it gets tough here.
Yeah, for sure. So has anybody really stood out to you this season in Richmond? Because I know you go to a lot of those games. Anybody on the team? Obviously, it's been a tough watch. I know. I kind of made a joke. We do a weekly update, and I said everybody should throw a parade. They had a winning week last week, so
that was their first winning series of the year.
Yeah,
and not only was it their first winning series, they hadn't split a series since April. So it's been a tough hang in Richmond this year. I know they are very happy to be 0-0, tonight, starting again. There's not a ton of talent there. There are guys I like. They're interesting guys. Diego Velasquez is a really fascinating kid because he can just put his bat on anything. And he's not, a lot of guys, behind the plate, Adrian Sagasta, you can say the same thing about, but Adrian Sagasta swings at everything. Just honest to God, swings at everything. Diego Velasquez is not like that. He has a very patient eye. He has a good plan at the plate. He can hit velocity. The thing is, he has, at this point in his life, and he is still a very young player, he has very little physicality to his game. He doesn't hit the ball particularly hard. He doesn't have any of that twitchiness we talk about. He doesn't have huge foot speed. I was talking to the manager about him recently. In particular, his tendency this year to kind of push. He tries to make things happen and will run into kind of outs on the base path a lot, or that tendency to try and not stay within yourself, they say. And what Pelf was saying is, one of these days his body is going to catch up with his brain. He's going to, come into his man strength, and then it's really going to click for him because he processes the game really fast in his brain, but his body just isn't quite there yet. He's still kind of that gangly 21-year-old. I think once you get some strength on him and just a little more physicality, he's an interesting player. In a kind of, I don't know, Adam Frazier is the comp that always comes to mind. That sort of like contact-oriented second base player. He definitely could be that because he really can get the bat on everything from both sides of the plate. Sagase, who I mentioned earlier, he has not hit very much in Double-A, to say the least, but he has really grown as a defensive catcher. And I believe he leads all of Double-A in throwing out base runners, stealing. So he's been fun to watch. I've always been a fan of Iverson Arteaga, a really talented defensive player. He has scuffled mightily this year. I believe his OPS might be in the 400s. It's been tough for him to hit at that level. He is still fun to watch offensively. And Hiram Maris, who I've really liked in the past, he's very strong, very physical. He can hit the ball really hard. It hasn't quite come together for him. He'll show you flashes, but it hasn't quite been there consistently. But he certainly can impact the baseball if he can kind of figure it out. We'll see if that happens. He's going to be a minor league free agent this year. And then there's some interesting arms. I think, obviously Joe Whitman is probably the top pitching prospect there. And he's sort of alternated between dominating outings. He literally had a perfect outing earlier this year, and other outings where he just gets kind of hit around hard or has trouble, throwing strikes. He's had both of those lately. And it's just a search for consistency with him. When I talk to him, he has brought up several times with me that he just doesn't have much experience. His first 2 years at Purdue, they did not pitch him at all. And even though he's a college arm, he doesn't have that many game innings. And so he's still kind of like learning. He's very much in learning mode, and he's trying to be consistent, but he's a left-hander with a really good slider that misses bats. The velocity's been increasing as the year goes on. So, he needs to learn a little bit. Braxton Roxby is a really interesting kid. The guy they got from the Reds for Taylor Rogers, really good sweeper, throws 95, 96. He just gave up his first run since I think April 18th or something the other day. He's definitely a promotion candidate because he played in Double-A for the Reds too. He's been really fun to watch. Jack Choate kind of fascinates me because he throws 88 and nobody can hit it because he gets crazy extension, and has this kind of weird low release slot, but just sort of a weird lefty who gets lots of strikeouts. That's kind of it. As you say, it's been a tough watch for them this year, and things have not gone as they hoped. But there's some talent here.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, going back on what you're saying about Diego Velasquez, where do you see him fitting in at the big league level eventually, given all the turnover that they've had at second base? We've seen Tyler Fitzgerald get some extended run. Now you're seeing Casey Schmidt really evolve over at third base. But with Chapman coming back, it looks like he's going to eventually slide over there. Where do you see Diego fitting in the near future?
Well, I'm not sure if it'll be the near future. I think it may still be a while for him sort of percolating a little bit. I do think he's the second baseman in the long run. I don't think this has always been a question about Velasquez because he doesn't have super quick feet and he doesn't have a huge arm. So the question of whether he can really play on the left side of the infield, I think, has always hovered around him, which is limiting because if you can't do that, then you don't have that utility path to follow very well. I think the best case for him will be to fit somewhere as a second baseman. But again, I do think that it's going to take a little just physical maturing for him to be ready to take that role on. Whether that's with the Giants or somewhere else, we'll see. A lot can change in a year or two, but that's where I would look for him to play. I don't think he's going to be a shortstop. I think his best bet is to find a second base position to call his own at some point.
Nice. Is there anybody because obviously you've been covering Richmond, you said, for the last 5 years. Is there anybody that you've seen come through in the last couple of years that might be in Sacramento right now that you feel pretty strongly is going to be a big contributor potentially for the Giants here in the not too distant future?
The not too distant future. I mean, some of my best predictions are already there. I will say that I've been very, very wrong with some of my total conviction. But I've been right sometimes too. Even when Randy Rodriguez got to Richmond, he was a tough look in some ways, and it was a lot of things had gone kind of wrong for him that year. He got put on the 40-man like a week before the lockout, so he spent his first year without being able to talk to coaches or anything. And then he went to spring and they didn't have time for him because they were rushing to get the year going. And then they tried to convert him to a starter. So a lot of stuff was kind of like going on. And he came to Richmond and stuff was down and he was having trouble throwing strikes. But I was just a huge proponent of Randy Rodriguez almost from the first time I saw him. And it's really fun to see what he's turned into. But let me go back and ask your actual question, which is who might be a contributor in the near future? Carson Whisenhunt is the obvious choice. I am sure Carson Whisenhunt is going to start games for the Giants this year. It's impossible to imagine how that wouldn't happen. And he is clearly, for me anyway, the number 2 prospect in this system and very clearly the top pitching prospect. I don't think anybody's really close to him. Left-handers who can throw a changeup like that have careers in the majors. I also think Carson Seymour's probably going to pitch for the Giants this year. And he's a kind of a more interesting in some ways because he throws so hard. Like he's a huge guy, huge human being. Just stand next to him and you will be very intimidated. But he doesn't necessarily miss bats. He'll sit 97 with his fastball. He gets a lot of grounders with it, but he doesn't strike a lot of people out. His slider is a really good swing and miss pitch. So I don't know if he's ultimately going to be kind of a starter or reliever, but he's a big league arm. There's no doubt about that to me. Trent Harris is another guy who I like a lot. I know the Giants do too. He's got really interesting action on his curveball because he has this very high overhead release and the ball just comes like straight down from heaven. It's really dramatic kind of how much that ball goes 12-6. And his fastball is pretty good shape. It's like 95, 96 with good rise. Really interesting kid too. His dad played in the majors for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody on the position side that I'm like, this guy is going to help? And I'm anybody who is, you've probably already seen at this point, I guess, would be the answer. I was always a huge fan of Tyler Fitzgerald too, and it's been tough to see him go through his struggles this year. I have to wonder if he's actually healthy. I think it takes a while to recover from a broken rib, but hopefully we'll see him back up and contributing soon too.
Yeah, I think we've kind of asked that same question regarding Fitzgerald because especially it seemed like his running game got dialed back quite a bit when he came back.
Yeah.
A lot of very obvious steal situations, and it felt like he was kind of dropping anchor at first. And I mean, I totally understand, like, one dive and you could re-injure it pretty badly. So
It's
I
really painful.
yeah, I can't imagine. So it definitely did feel. I was very shocked when him and Casey got injured at kind of similar timelines, and he came back first, only by like a day or two. But it was still like I was very shocked. I thought he for sure was going to be out several weeks longer.
I did too. My wife had a broken rib several years ago, and it was like breathing was painful for longer than Fitzgerald was on the IL, I think.
Yeah, so hopefully he can get healthy and get right. But yeah, to your point about Seymour, I had kind of a similar observation on him, and I've been super impressed by him, his growth from last year to this year. I feel like he's been a lot more consistent. But I one of the things I love about him is, you're talking about how he throws hard and he's got good run on his two seam. He likes to throw that sinker. I love a guy that will just throw inside all day long on guys, especially with that kind of action. And at 97, it's been really impressive for him.
Yeah, and he's added a couple pitches this year, try and make his repertoire a little wider, not just 2 pitches anymore. It's funny when he first came to Richmond. I remember his velocity was way down. I mean, for him, it was like 93, which is really hard. But and I was like, I thought he threw harder than that. And then over the course of the year, he ramped it up to 96. And so I asked him one time, kind of what's going on. He's like, yeah, I had this strange thing where I lost like 30 pounds this winter, and nobody could figure out why. And I'm like, huh. So he'd been building up his strength all year. He does the thing where he only eats meat, right? He only eats like raw meat. He's been building up his strength. And even like a small Carson Seymour was still a huge fan. So there's just so much power in that body. You just look at it, it's like, yeah, this is a major league body for sure.
Yeah, interesting. So is
also,
there
his girlfriend's father is the person that Ted Lasso was based on, which I find just a factoid that I must repeat as often as possible because it's so funny.
That's amazing. that is to me, that's like one of the great shows of the last 5 or so years. Like that character is amazing. So is there anybody in Eugene or San Jose? I know obviously you get to watch a lot of, you said you go to Arizona, you get to catch a lot of these guys at various times, but is there anybody that's either in Eugene or San Jose that you're really looking forward to getting to watch every day in Richmond at some point?
I mean, absolutely. Bo Davidson, who I saw him last year in San Jose, and I got to talk to him there. And then I saw him again in the fall and got to talk to him a little bit there. Really, really interesting kid. And every time you see him, he's like a little stronger and it swings a little tighter. It's a violent swing he has. So we'll see how well that translates to when the stuff level starts building up. But I really want to see him in Richmond and watch him close for months at a time. That's going to be a fun trip because I think it's just one of the more interesting stories and one of the more interesting players in the system. And then Dakota Jordan. I went out to Arizona in August last year, and the way they have it now, they have this sort of informal games that they bring the college or bring the draft guys in to play, so it doesn't count anywhere. But they play games every day, and I watched him, and he was just swinging and missing sliders, kind of over and over and over again, and he had a very kind of crouched stance. And then I came back and saw him again in spring training this year. His stance was completely different. His mechanics were completely different, and he kind of opened up, and he said he was seeing the ball better, and he was hitting everything. I'm like, oh, this is a pretty remarkable change from fall to spring, and of course he's just carried that on. He has really had a thrilling year because you want to talk about athletes. There are not many people in the organization who have his level of athleticism, incredible power, plus bat speed, almost so much bat speed that he doesn't know what to do with it. He's swinging too fast. Pretty dynamic outfielder, big throwing arm. He has it all. And, if he can and he has aptitude. The coaches rave about, how easy he is to coach and work with. If he can make it all work and kind of like keep climbing up that development hill, he's a guy who would be very, very exciting to watch down the line.
Nice.
Now, it's kind of interesting what you're saying with them going and changing Dakota's swing a little bit. Just from some of the interviews we've done, we've noticed they've gotten a really hands-on approach with a lot of these guys in this recent classes, swings and stances. We've talked to Xander Darby, and he mentioned how they changed up the way he stands in the box with his footwork.
Very definite change there.
Yeah, and we've noticed it with Jeremiah Jenkins as well. He's got a completely different swing, stance, everything compared to last season when he came out of college. Do you feel this regime is going to take a little bit more aggressive approach with changing guys' swings than the last regime, or is that something you feel like has kind of been there and we may just have not noticed it as much?
I mean, that's always there. I do think, I think Michael Holmes, the scouting director, and Kyle Haynes, the farm director, work very well in tandem, and that they have an idea of what they want to do with guys that they select. But I had a long conversation this spring with the minor league hitting coordinator for the club, kind of asking about just philosophy of. I'm trying to find out if they're doing like the bat pass stuff that the Red Sox are doing. And he kept coming back to, it's really individual. It's really, you look at what each guy needs and try and give it to them. There's no silver bullet. There's no, magic trick. He said it's easier with guys if you don't have to change their mechanics, because that's the hardest thing to do, because you have muscle memory, right? And your body wants to do what it's been doing. So that's more complicated. But he just kept coming back to you look at the player and you try and figure out what he needs. Every single hitter is a puzzle, and you're always trying to solve the puzzle. Some of them need emotional support. Some of them need, a little chewing out. Some of them need change in stance. Some of them need to look at the data and see that their approach could change. But it's not systematic in any way. They really, as much as possible, are trying to go case by case. So,
okay.
Yeah. Ricky, do you have any other questions on the system or anything that you want to ask?
So going back to what we're talking about with the MLB draft that's coming up this summer, who do you think would be most likely to be a target for the Giants in the first round this year?
There's always a lot of movement at the end. But as I say, there's this big high school class of shortstops. Which of those guys are going to get out of their reach is hard to tell. I think if JoJo Parker was on the board when they picked, that would be a fantastic pick. But he seems to be rising high. Steel Hall, Kason Cunningham, are a couple of the guys from that group who probably will be around. I don't think Billy Carlson will. Ike Irish out of Auburn is a guy who is caught, but I think a lot of people see him as an outfielder. He very well could be the guy they target, although college bats have a tendency to move up on draft day. And then I kind of think that, going a very different way, but Gage Wood is an interesting dude who didn't have a great year this year, but his fastball metrics kind of just jump off the page. A lot of people comp him to Cade Horton, who is similar in that he was a guy who didn't have a great year his junior year, but his pitch metrics were so good that the Cubs grabbed him in the first round, and he's worked well. Of course, Wood threw that no-hitter in the College World Series with 19 strikeouts, which maybe raised his profile. I think he's going to be an interesting guy, but I would really look at that group, that Hall, Kason Cunningham, Billy Carlson, JoJo Parker. That group of high school shortstops is who I really think they may be eyeing, and then Ike Irish if Ike Irish is on the board.
Yeah, Ike Irish is interesting because I know we feel like they definitely need to just upgrade the catcher position in the organization as a whole a little bit. It feels like there's not a lot of depth there behind Patrick. So
there is not.
Yeah, and obviously there's major questions already on where he whether or not he can even stick there,
Right.
but and he doesn't really fit the whole athleticism necessarily that
True
we're
enough.
talking about wanting, but
he's another of those college
he can hit.
cornerbacks.
Yeah.
But man, he can hit, and I don't think a lot of people would be upset about that if they.
No.
So,
if you can hit, they'll figure it out. If the bat will play, they'll find a way.
Yeah. So I guess the last question I really have, I don't know if Ricky has any others, but you've covered the team for quite a while. Do you have any like great memories, certain players, any cool stories, any players that really just stood out above the rest for you when you were covering the team?
I mean, I have said for several years that one thing I think the Giants do a really good job of is they get very, very high character. They get good kids. There are a lot of good kids I have covered. The Richmond teams I've been around, there have not been many knuckleheads. I'll always remember Tyler Fitzgerald and Will Wilson both have stories that are very similar. That, when a guy's really going through a tough time, I tend to back off, like, let them figure it out. And then if things get turned around, then I want to interview them and kind of talk about but I don't want to get in someone's face when they're struggling. And Tyler Fitzgerald, his first 2 months in Richmond were as bad a struggle as you're ever going to see a guy go through. And I remember I'd be hanging around the batting cage for BP, and he just came up and introduced himself to me once and started talking about kind of what was going on and what he was working on and trying to work his way through. And that was just so impressive to me because there was, no reason for him to do that. And the same with Will Wilson. I remember the day he got sent back down from Sacramento to Richmond, maybe the second time, same thing. I was going to kind of give him his space, and he immediately came up and said hi to me and said it was good to see me, even though I know he was lying. It was not good to see me in Richmond, but just the highest quality guy. Another one like that, Ishmael Mungia, who's maybe my favorite player to be around, and I think everybody's favorite player to be around. Everybody loves Mungi. Big personality, so much energy, so much joy. And same thing when he got sent down from Sacramento back to Richmond, which is not fun. It's not fun being sent down. But he saw me and he came up and gave me a big hug. And said it was good to see me again. Those are the ones that stick out. But I really, there's so many of these players who I love. Von Brown is just the highest quality guy. Kyle Harrison, who I wish nothing but success to. With the Red Sox, always a kid that impressed me because he was just so mature at such a young age and had such a sense of what he needed to do. Hayden Birdsong, same thing. Hayden Birdsong would just always chat with me. Just the nicest guy until he got Mason Black, another guy, just the nicest guy. I can go on forever about how nice these guys are off the field, but when they get on the field, they're not quite as nice to competitors. But I really had a great time getting to know these kids because they work hard. They're trying to do something that's just incredibly impossible, and generally speaking, they're all really generous with their time and very, very, I don't know, introspective, eloquent. They will share really interesting things about hard parts of the game with you that really makes you root for them all and hope they all succeed.
That's awesome. Yeah. Ricky, do you have any other questions you want to ask before we wrap it up?
No. That was it.
Awesome. Well, big thanks to Roger. I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as we did. That was very informative. It was great. Really hope we can do this again sometime with you, Roger. That was just a great time. But everybody, make sure you follow Roger. Do you want to give like I said, I'll put your handles and everything in the description, but everybody make sure you follow Roger on X, his Substack, his podcast, all that good stuff. There's a lot of great material there. And thanks again.
hopefully, as I was saying before we started, I had a little knee issue that may cause some travel problems, but hopefully I'm going to be going to the DSL next month, and so it'll be a good time to be a Their Giants subscriber, because I should have lots of great video and stuff up when that happens. But thanks so much for having me on. This was really a fun conversation.
Yeah, our pleasure, and we look forward to hearing the report. And like I said, I hope it is a very quick recovery for you for the knee. Obviously,
hopefully so. Yeah. It was poorly timed. I was actually at a Richmond game, and I was running to turn my camera on for first pitch when I went down.
Yeah. Oh, that's rough. But all right, well, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, and go Giants, and we'll talk to you guys all next time. So
thanks so much, guys. I appreciate being on.
Thank you, Roger.